Picture this. It's winter, 1000 CE. You're standing on a Viking longship in the middle of the North Atlantic. Waves the size of apartment buildings are smashing against your boat. The temperature? Well below freezing. Ice is coating every rope, every plank. Your beard is frozen solid to your chest. Every breath you take turns into a cloud of ice crystals. You've been at sea for 3 weeks. No walls, no cabin, no shelter whatsoever. Just you, 40 other desperate souls, and an open wooden boat being tossed around like a toy in a bathtub. And here's the truly terrifying part. You have absolutely no way to make fire. None. Zero. Nothing to warm your frozen hands. Nothing to heat food. Nothing to dry your soaking wet clothes. So here's the question that'll blow your mind. How did these Vikings not only survive, but actually conquer half the known world sailing like this? Because here's what nobody tells you. The answer isn't about toughness or brute strength. It's about something far more brilliant. And when I reveal what they actually did, it's going to completely change how you think about survival itself. Let's dive in. Now, before we go any further, let me destroy a myth that Hollywood has been feeding you for decades. Every Viking movie you've ever seen shows them cooking on their ships, right? Little fires burning in metal bowls, warriors huddled around flames. It looks romantic. It looks authentic. It's completely, utterly wrong. And we know this because the Vikings themselves left us the proof. Not in books or stories, but in the actual ships buried beneath the earth for 1,000 years. Let me take you to Roskilde Fjord in Denmark. In the 1960s, archaeologists discovered 5 Viking ships, warships, cargo vessels, fishing boats, all perfectly preserved in the mud. These ships dated from 1000 to 1070 CE, right in the prime of the Viking Age. The researchers found everything: water barrels, tool chests, ballast stones, even traces of food still preserved after a millennium. But here's what made them stop cold. Not a single heating device, no brazier, no hearth, no fire pit. Nothing. And it wasn't just these 5 ships. The Oseberg ship from 834 CE, no heating system. The Gokstad ship from 890 CE, nothing. Even the brand-new Gellertstad excavation from 2020, using the most advanced ground-penetrating radar technology, same result, 0 cooking or heating equipment. Now, you might be thinking, maybe Vikings were just primitive. Maybe they didn't know how to make fire on boats. Dead wrong. Here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Vikings absolutely had the technology for shipboard heating. Mediterranean cultures had been cooking on ships for centuries before Vikings even set sail. Roman ships had bronze braziers. Byzantine vessels had full galley systems with chimneys. Vikings knew about all of this. They traded with these cultures. They raided these cultures. They definitely understood how to build a shipboard hearth. They chose not to. Deliberately. Consciously. Why? Because Vikings understood something that would take modern engineers centuries to figure out. Fire and wooden ships are mortal enemies. Think about what a Viking longship actually is. Overlapping wooden planks sealed with tar. Gaps stuffed with animal hair and wool, rigging waterproofed with pine pitch. The sail, a massive piece of wool treated with animal fat. Every single surface is basically gasoline waiting for a match. But here's the real nightmare scenario. Viking ships are completely open. No walls, no bulkheads, no fire breaks, nothing to contain a blaze. Modern studies have shown that a fire on a Viking ship could consume the entire vessel in under 4 minutes. 4 minutes from spark to total destruction. So Vikings made a calculated decision. We'll freeze our asses off, but at least we won't burn to death in the middle of the ocean. But that creates an even bigger mystery. If they couldn't use fire, how did they survive? All right, so Vikings are stuck on frozen seas for weeks at a time with no fire. Most modern humans would die of hypothermia in hours under these conditions. So what was their secret weapon? It starts with something so simple you'll kick yourself for not thinking of it. Really, really good clothes. But I'm not talking about just throwing on extra layers. Vikings had developed a textile technology so advanced that it wouldn't be matched until the 20th century. Excavations at Herjolfsnes in Greenland uncovered Viking clothing that had been preserved in the permafrost for centuries. And what researchers found shocked them. These weren't just random wool garments. This was a sophisticated, multi-layered system where each layer had a specific job. One layer for wind resistance, another for insulation, another for moisture management. And here's the killer detail. This wool worked even when it was wet. Unlike modern cotton or synthetic fabrics that become useless once soaked, Viking wool maintained its insulating properties in the freezing spray of the North Atlantic. But the most brilliant innovation, it comes from the Laxdæla saga, and it sounds absolutely wild. Every single morning, before the ship set sail, women crew members, yes, women sailed on these ships too, would use bone needles and waxed thread to sew the men's sleeves shut at the wrists. Not tie them, not button them. Actually stitch them closed with needle and thread. This created an airtight seal that prevented any heat from escaping through the cuffs. Your body heat stayed trapped inside the clothing system. When warriors needed to fight, or when the ship landed, they'd cut themselves free with their knives. Then the next morning, they'd sew everything shut again. Think about the psychological commitment this represents. Every single day, you're literally being sewn into your clothes. You can't get out without a blade. But that level of dedication is what kept you alive. Archaeological evidence from Greenlandic burial sites shows this wasn't just saga exaggeration. Preserved garments actually show evidence of daily stitching and cutting at the wrists. But even with this advanced clothing technology, there's a problem. Eventually, you have to sleep. And when you're unconscious, your body temperature drops. In conditions this extreme, that's when hypothermia kills you. So Vikings developed what might be their most ingenious survival innovation. And it's going to make you really uncomfortable. Okay, forget every image Hollywood has ever shown you of Vikings sleeping. No individual fur blankets, no personal space, none of that. The reality was far more intimate and far more effective. According to multiple saga sources, including the Eagles saga, Vikings used what they called hudfat, literally skin bags. These were two-person sleeping bags made of sheepskin with the fur on the inside. You heard that right. Two-person sleeping bags. You and another dude zipped up together for the night. Now, before you start cracking jokes, understand the brutal physics at work here. One human body generates a certain amount of heat. Two bodies in an enclosed space generate compound heat, exponentially more warmth than the sum of their parts. Studies of these sleeping systems show they could maintain internal temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air using nothing but body heat. But here's where Viking strategic thinking gets really impressive. They didn't just randomly pair people up. Crews were assigned sleeping partners based on their watch schedules. Think about the genius here. When it's your turn to stand watch, you get out of the warm sleeping bag. Your partner stays inside, keeping it warm. When you switch, you climb back into a sleeping space that's already heated. The bag never fully cools down. The sleeping arrangement itself showed incredible thermal engineering. Reconstructions of Viking ships show that crews slept between the rowing benches on platforms made from stored oars. This kept them elevated above the bilge, the bottom of the boat where the coldest air sinks. And when the ship wasn't actively sailing, they'd lower the massive wool sail and stretch it over the entire vessel like a tent, trapping the collective body heat of 40 men underneath. Think about what this means. Even wealthy Vikings, even ship captains, even famous warriors. Everyone shared these communal sleeping arrangements. There were no special privileges for rank. Survival requirements overrode social distinctions. The cold was the ultimate equalizer. But maintaining body heat in these conditions requires enormous amounts of energy. You're burning thousands of calories just staying alive, which creates yet another problem. You need food, lots of food, and you can't cook any of it. So what did Vikings eat on these frozen nightmare voyages? Imagine eating nothing but cold, preserved food for 3 straight weeks. No hot meals, no warm drinks. Everything you put in your mouth is the same temperature as the freezing air around you. This is what Vikings did on every single voyage. Excavations at trading posts like Hedeby in Denmark reveal exactly what they packed. Dried fish that could last for months without refrigeration. Ship's biscuits, basically hardtates made from oats and nuts that wouldn't spoil in salt spray, and something called cold porridge. Now, this cold porridge system, described in the Islendinga saga, was particularly clever. Before departure, cooks on land would prepare massive quantities of porridge mixed with tons of butter and salt. The fat and salt acted as preservatives. This mixture would congeal into a thick, nutrient-dense paste that Vikings could eat directly or mix with cold water to make it slightly less awful. Was it delicious? Absolutely not. But each serving packed the 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day you need to survive in a gritty cold. Excavations at York in England show the massive scale of this provisioning system. Warehouses full of dried fish, hundreds of pounds of hard-tacked biscuits, fermented dairy products specifically designed for long voyages without cooking. But here's the question that should be nagging at you. If Vikings had to eat cold food for weeks at a time, where did they prepare all this stuff? Surely they weren't at sea constantly. And that brings us to a discovery that completely reframes how we understand Viking navigation. Recent coastal surveys have uncovered over 200 documented Viking harbor sites spanning from Norway all the way to Newfoundland. These weren't just beaches where they pulled up their boats. These were full infrastructure networks, purpose-built bases for supporting long-distance voyages. The most revealing excavation happened at Torksey in England, where teams from the universities of Sheffield and York spent 8 years uncovering a Viking winter camp that spanned 55 hectares. That's about 100 football fields. This wasn't a military raid. This was a complete operational base with proper hearths, workshops, storage facilities, even family accommodations. It was a heating station that supported entire fleet operations. On land, Vikings had incredibly sophisticated cooking technology. Iron pots with integrated tripod systems, specialized suspension chains for hanging cookware over fires, soapstone vessels with superior heat retention. All of this technology existed. All of it worked brilliantly. And none of it ever went on the ships. Because Vikings understood the fundamental truth. At sea, safety beats comfort. Every single time. But this raises one final, crucial question. Could modern people actually survive the same conditions using authentic Viking methods? Or are we just too soft? 2007. A team of modern sailors decides to answer this question once and for all. They're going to recreate an authentic Viking voyage using exact historical methods. No cheating, no modern gear, nothing Vikings didn't have. The expedition is called the Sea Stallion Voyage, and it's organized by the Viking Ship Museum in Denmark. They've built a perfect reconstruction of a Skåldelev ship, one of those vessels we talked about earlier that was preserved in Roskilde Fjord for 1,000 years. The mission: sail from Roskilde, Denmark, to Dublin, Ireland, across the North Sea, using only authentic Viking techniques. That means no modern clothing, no synthetic fabrics, no high-tech sleeping bags, and absolutely, positively, no heating systems, just wool, sheepskin, cold food, and shared body heat. The crew trains for months, learning how to sew each other's sleeves shut every morning, learning how to sleep in pairs in the hoodfat bags, learning how to time their watches so the sleeping areas never fully cool down. And then they set sail. The first week is brutal. Modern people aren't used to being cold for extended periods. The psychological challenge is almost worse than the physical one. Your brain keeps screaming at you that you should be doing something, making fire, finding shelter, getting warm somehow. But they stick to the Viking playbook. Layered wool clothing, even when wet, communal sleeping arrangements, coordinated watch rotations. By week 2, something remarkable happens. The crew stops fighting the cold and starts working with it. They develop the same rhythms Vikings would have had, knowing exactly when to seal up the sleeping bags, when to huddle together during breaks, when to increase food intake to maintain core temperature. Throughout the entire voyage across the North Sea, some of the most challenging waters on Earth, the crew maintains safe core body temperatures. No one develops hypothermia. No one suffers frostbite. No one needs emergency evacuation. The voyage is a complete success, and it proves something profound. Viking survival techniques weren't based on superhuman endurance or special genetic toughness. They were based on systematic engineering and social cooperation. Anyone can do it if they understand the principles. But there's one more element to Viking survival that the Sea Stallion expedition revealed. Something that goes beyond just physical warmth. Psychological survival. Here's something that archaeologists discovered that completely changed how we understand Viking survival. It wasn't just about staying physically warm. It was about staying mentally strong. Excavations at over 50 Viking camps have uncovered more than 300 gaming pieces, dice, elaborate board games, carved entertainment items. This stuff shows up everywhere. Vikings traveled. At first, researchers thought these were just luxury items, entertainment for wealthy warriors. But the sheer quantity suggests something else entirely. These weren't luxuries. They were survival equipment. Think about what happens to your brain when you're cold, miserable, and scared for weeks on end. Your mental state starts to deteriorate. Depression sets in. Morale collapses. And when morale collapses, people make stupid decisions, fatal decisions. Vikings understood this intuitively, what modern psychology now calls psychological thermogenesis. Your mental state directly affects your physical ability to endure cold. According to researchers at the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, Vikings deliberately invested enormous time in social activities during harsh conditions. Gaming, storytelling, organized competitions, even wrestling matches on deck. This wasn't about entertainment. It was about keeping minds engaged so bodies could endure. But here's the thing that really shows Viking strategic brilliance. They didn't just endure winter sailing. They actively avoided it whenever possible. See, Hollywood gives us this image of Vikings as crazy daredevils who sailed year-round through hurricanes and blizzards. That's nonsense. Vikings timed their voyages very carefully within seasonal weather windows. They maximized shore contact rather than enduring endless cold exposure. They planned expeditions around known harbor networks where they could regularly warm up, cook proper meals, and rest. The longest anyone would typically be at sea continuously was about 3 weeks. Then they'd make landfall, warm up properly, reprovision, and set out again. This wasn't weakness. This was strategy. Vikings succeeded not by being tougher than everyone else, but by being smarter than everyone else. They understood their own limitations. They built systems to work around those limitations. They cooperated in ways that made individual weakness irrelevant. And that brings us to the final, most important lesson from this entire story. So let's bring this all together, because the lesson here is way bigger than just Viking history. The evidence from 8 major archaeological excavations definitively establishes that Vikings did not heat their ships during voyages. This wasn't because they were primitive. It wasn't because they didn't have the technology. It wasn't because they were somehow genetically built for cold. It was a calculated decision based on safety engineering. They chose vessel integrity and crew survival over individual comfort. And they succeeded through a combination of advanced wool technology that functioned even when wet, ingenious social warming systems using shared body heat, strategic voyage planning with extensive shore-based infrastructure, and comprehensive provisioning systems designed for cold consumption. But here's what really gets me. Vikings reached North America 500 years before Columbus. They established trade routes spanning from Greenland to Constantinople, literally halfway around the known world. They shaped medieval Europe through maritime dominance, and they did it all in open boats, deliberately choosing to sail without fire. When you instinctively reach for your car's heater because it's a bit chilly outside, remember that Viking sailors made the conscious decision to reject such comfort for weeks at a time. They chose strategic capability over warmth, operational safety over individual ease, collective survival over personal comfort. But here's the deepest truth this story reveals. Vikings didn't just endure the cold. They systematically transformed their entire approach to survive within it. They restructured their social systems around it. They reimagined what was possible within its constraints. Modern survival experts talk about something called the survival pyramid. At the base, you have physical tools, clothing, shelter, food. In the middle, you have technical knowledge, how to use those tools effectively. But at the very top, the thing that determines whether you actually survive is mindset. Your willingness to adapt, your ability to cooperate, your capacity to make hard choices between what feels good and what actually works. Vikings mastered all 3 levels. They had the physical technology. They had the technical knowledge. But most importantly, they had the collective mindset that made individual suffering tolerable, because it served a larger purpose. In the end, Vikings didn't need to heat their ships because they had learned something far more powerful: how to heat themselves through cooperation, planning, and sheer strategic brilliance. They proved that humans don't survive extreme environments by overpowering them with technology. We survive by understanding our limitations, working together systematically, and making smart trade-offs between short-term comfort and long-term success. That's not just a history lesson. That's a blueprint for how to tackle any impossible challenge. So next time you face something that seems unbearable, ask yourself, what would Vikings do? Probably not fight the problem head-on with brute force. They'd step back, analyze the constraints, find the clever workaround, and get everyone working together toward the same goal. Because in the end, Vikings didn't conquer half the world by being the toughest. They conquered it by being the smartest. And that's a lesson that's just as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic.